is really going to be about a story of a journey, a story of a pathway, both personal and professional. And, during our time this evening, we'll have some interesting conversations around, how did this pathway start? How did this become so intertwined between my personal life and professional passions? And then what did nature teach me along the way in that journey? I think it's also really important to understand that we all have really important and powerful stories to share that are unique to each and every one of us. And the more we share those stories, the more that we connect, the more that we understand in really powerful ways. And so, as we go on this journey together this evening, I encourage everyone to think about their story, their relationship with nature, and what that's meant to them. So, as I mentioned, this is a story of my connection to the environment, to nature, and I find that it's very unique to me. And, as we continue on this journey together, be thinking about, are there things that I'm sharing that resonate with you? Are there parts of that story that align with yours? Are there differences? Do you feel similar emotions or have similar thoughts as I've had along those journeys? And before we begin, I think it's important to understand too that nature is always teaching us something. And I find myself thinking and asking all the time, are we listening? So one of my first learnings and connections in nature was really about the focus on community and connection. When I think about the question of who inspired my connection to nature, this collage here is just really a snapshot of many different people that have been a part of that pathway, been a part of that journey in various phases and stages of my life. And that, we also learn that we're connected in more ways than we think when making these types of having these personal relationships. And when I see these individuals, I think of stories, unique memories that really, are unique to each of these individual relationships that I have. I think about learnings and teachings that these individuals have imparted on me, and how they've continued to help me grow and foster and strengthen my connection to nature. And I want to also, again, say that this is a journey. So at various parts of that journey, our relationship with nature can change. We may want or need different things. And it's important to recognize that, because I think in those moments, there are those individuals that come into your life that really help you take that next step toward that learning, towards that growth, towards new experiences. And then I think about that second question there. Who continues to empower you to engage others and inspire their connection to nature? And for my passion as an educator, as someone who really centers around community engagement, this is so critical in terms of paying it forward. That, when I start to share some more of my story, you'll see these different individuals pop up. And for myself, I really look at as a responsibility for me to really pay it forward and give it all back. What am I doing on my day-to-day life that's helping to co-create, helping to co-develop, helping to support, as many different individuals as I can and their unique connections to nature as well. And as I transition to this next slide, I want everyone to think about this reflection. So I want us all to take a few minutes to think through. What was your first and memorable experience in nature? Where was it? What did you see? What did you hear? Maybe there was a really interesting smell that resonated with you. And how did you feel in that moment? And were you with anyone? And if so, who? And also thinking about what made that moment memorable to you. So I want everyone to, I'm gonna give a few minutes just to people to reflect on those questions. If you would like to share, you're more than welcome to do so in the chat. But I think those are really important things to consider when we think about those initial powerful moments. And those moments really spark some incredibly magical steps. Okay. So nearby nature. When I think about a lot of those questions that I just posed, it really to me starts with how I've always thought about framing of nature. So often I find myself seeing, I might read something or see something on TV or on the computer where it talks about having to go to nature. And while that may be true for many locations, I think what really helped me was this idea of nature being around me all the time. It's everywhere. Now, it might be in different forms. There might be different types of animals, different types of habitats, different types of environments. But that concept of nature being all around us is one that I feel has been centered my entire life. And what's really important is, again, this nature in my own backyard. So those two images in the middle, and you can see the smiles on my faces, my brother's face, my mom's, just enjoying the outdoors right in our own back deck in Mitchellville, Maryland. There's a lake that backed up, that our home backed up to. And I can remember time outside at that point in my life. I can remember the smell of, my parents grilling on the deck. Some really incredibly delicious food there, and also spending that time with family. And those were some very transformational moments in the outdoors. But I can also remember hearing the sound of geese and ducks, the sound of frogs calling, seeing turtles basking on logs in the lake. And if we were really lucky and really quiet, the surprise appearance of a red fox. These moments were truly magical for me. And I could sit there looking at those animals, hearing those animals call for hours. And what's really important is that these animals weren't doing something incredibly special. They were just doing what they do on a regular basis. And for me, that was truly magical. And it's in those moments that I kept thinking about, looking back on this now, as I was really developing my intrinsic view of nature. Nature has value just for being nature, right? These animals have value just for being themselves, not for any benefit that they give to me. And it was starting to begin my journey of developing my own personal conservation ethic too, as I was building these strong connections to these wildlife species. So when I look back, there were some really powerful connections that were made here. The first is connectivity to a place. I want us all to think about a place that's really memorable for us, especially one in nature. Maybe it's a place you go to when you're stressed. Maybe it's a place that you frequent because of the incredible wildlife that's there. Maybe you see your favorite animals there. And what was so great about this connection to place is the regularity with which, I could explore it and continue to build that really strong connection to this lake. I think there's also a really strong connectivity to these individual species. As I sat and watched or listened, I was bonding with each of these different species, connecting in really powerful ways, that, and understanding, learning and understanding more about what these species do and how they interact. The other connection that stands out to me is this strong connection I have with water. For me, there's being out in nature, and I know what that does for me from a mental health standpoint. It centers me. It really helps me relax and de-stress. But then there's something special about just being near water. It's like taking it up to another level. And I'll give you a good example. 2020 has presented several unspeakable challenges, from the COVID pandemic to continuing racial injustices and so much more. And I can remember kind of going through my day in, day out job at work and over the summer, and definitely that could feel that stress building. So when it came time for me to take that vacation, take that break, I remember telling everyone that the goal of my vacation, or a staycation, I should say, is to spend as much time in, on, by, near, around, or close to water as I could. And instantly everything was better. Instantly I was in a different space. I was that stress had kind of removed itself from me. And that's always been that power of water that I felt. And I also want to acknowledge a sense of safety and the sense of security. So these really formative moments, I was spending time with my family, people that I trusted. And I think that it's very important that we center that, because it's really important to have those really strong relationships, especially as educators, when delivering programming in the outdoors. Trust is really, really important, especially when it involves, opportunities for new experiences. And the last thing I'll say here is that while my family has since moved away from this neighborhood, my aunt and uncle actually still live really close by to this space. And every time I'm able to go back and visit, there's a moment of reflection that I have about some of these formative moments and connections to nature, and just how powerful those were. And thinking about, again, that question I asked in the beginning was, how did I get from, this person that really loved spending time outdoors into the professional that I am today? So keeping the spark alive. So I mentioned that kind of that really powerful moment, right, of that nearby nature. And so how do you grow from that? How do you move forward? And this next phase really requires time, intentional investment of time and patience. Understanding that as we build those unique relationships with nature, again, that we all want and need different things, the connection to nature grows at different paces for everyone. The other thing that comes to mind when I think about these images, which I'll go into in a second, is this balance of learnings that have happened. So these learnings happen at the individual level and in community. And central to both of those are time for exploration. It's important to have time to explore as an individual, and then there's really powerful dynamics that happen when we explore in a group and how we learn from one another. The first picture of my brother and I visiting the local public library, I was, for as long as I can remember, and for all the stories my parents tell me, I was an avid learner. I wanted to get every single book I could about nature and wildlife and animals. And I just kept soaking it up. I can remember story times. I can also remember reading books and making books of my own as I got older, these little booklets of highlighting different animals and what they do and where they live and what they like to eat. And then I can think about moments going to a variety of different smaller scale nature centers that were really close to my house. Um, these places, I took programs with, I engage in summer camps. Sometimes it involved school trips. And again, I just kept soaking it up. And then I can recall visits to places like the National Zoo or the National Aquarium, which, is so surreal for me because, I definitely remember going to the National Aquarium as a kid. As I got older and as I started my career as an educator, I can remember taking students and campers to the aquarium. And now to be there working, it's come full circle. And the one thing that I also want to make sure that it's important here is that these are, again, still all local places. They might not be like right in your own backyard directly, but they're still within, the county, or they're within the state of Maryland. And it's critical to acknowledge that within our field, within our industry, that there is still much work to be done to ensure that everyone has opportunities to access, visit, and engage with these places and programs, right? And it's really imperative for all of us to do what we can do to help dismantle and intentionally dismantle those barriers to access, right? Because we know the power of regular connections to programs, to outdoor spaces, right? And so, again, continuing to work together across our institutions to really address some of these inequities is really important. All right, so transformational experiences. When I think about, again, my journey, exposure and experience is really critical. And I just want to thank my family, my mom, my dad, my brother, for really, prioritizing these transformational experiences because they were life changing. They, opened my eyes to opportunities in this field that, and experiences that it can't be replaced. And I also want to, as I've been thinking this year about some other messaging that's come through during these experiences, are the connections to public spaces and public lands. That by my family as African Americans, prioritizing trips to these spaces, they were sending a really clear and powerful message to my brother and I. These are spaces for you too. As African Americans, as Black people, you belong here too. And I think that's really critical. When we think about access and we think about, just opportunities to build connections to these natural spaces. Another thing that I've learned when visiting these natural spaces is just how vast, the vastness of them. And I've always been really energized by that. When you can sit somewhere and you can look around and you feel really small being in the outdoors, it's a really just a powerful feeling to have. And it's one that, again, just elicits so many feelings of wonder and awe and amazement. Nature is beautiful. There is no doubt about it. And again, having these experiences as a family, spending that time again with people that, I trusted, people that had my best interest at heart, in these new experiences was also really critical and really important. And I wanted to take some time to share some stories of 12-year-old me, how I perceived my experiences at these public lands. And again, I want to have a special thank you to my mom, who really encouraged my brother and I to, whether it was draw or write out our experiences that we were having on this trip. And it's been really fun and just so incredibly energizing to see and to reread what 12-year-old me thought about these experiences on the West Coast. So one of the pictures here shows the four of us as a family just finishing up a whitewater rafting trip. And it was the first time I'd ever been whitewater rafting before, I think in Montana. And this journal entry is dated Wednesday, July 14th, 1999. Our leader was Sasha. Now we went whitewater rafting. It was a blast. It got very wet. The water was very hard to paddle. We got stuck on a rock for a while. Now we're going to Yellowstone. So far, I've seen a hot spring with bubbling water. We saw 1 bison so far and 6 elk. Now we're at Gibbon Falls. The trees are mostly burned by fire. We just saw Barrel Springs. We saw 6 more elk, and I was standing about 20 feet away from one. We saw some more elk and bison. In those moments, thinking and reflecting on that particular journal entry, so one thing that really stands out to me is, again, that the feelings that are coming out, the excitement of seeing wildlife, the excitement of having those encounters with just incredible species, but also even some of the fear, right? That had been my first time whitewater rafting. So, getting stuck on a rock, and I can remember watching our guide kind of step out of the boat and then push us off and then quickly jump back in. I think that those are powerful emotions, right? Those are important things to recognize. And as I mentioned in that journal entry at age 12, it was a blast. And now I love going whitewater rafting. It's something that I do with friends when I have the opportunity to do so. I've even, through prior jobs, been able to coordinate whitewater rafting trips for other young people, for other students and campers, so that they can have those types of transformational experiences as well. And I'm going to share another journal entry from Yellowstone. Today we went back to Yellowstone. We saw 1 bison and 2 elk so far. I saw 1 type of bird. We just saw the fountain paint pots, Clestine Pool, and a geyser, which was going off. A bison was about 15 feet away from us. We just saw Old Faithful. It was very pretty. We just saw a waterfall. We saw bison eating. And then we saw bears. We saw other wildlife. And again, there are these strong individual connections with these species that are coming out in these journal entries. And what I think is so incredible about this is the curiosity that comes out of these conversations and these connections about what these species are, what they're doing. And that really connects to learning. And as I mentioned earlier, I love to learn and I love to grow. And what's also really critical here that I wanted to share is also the power of reflection. When I think about the opportunity to really write about these experiences in the outdoors, those things can be done through, a reflection that we did earlier this evening. It can be done through drawing. It can be done through a discussion. And as I've read back through what my experiences were as a 12-year-old, I just continue to connect back to why it's so important to have those reflective moments. And as an educator, it's something I try to prioritize for a lot of the programs that I do. Because in those reflections, even if everyone is going through a similar experience, it might impact us in different ways. And when we open that floor up to a reflective experience, you start to see things through other people's eyes. And especially when doing programs, that can be so, so powerful to observe. So when I think about my next steps, I clearly had this passion for spending time in nature, for observing wildlife, and I loved animals. But what exactly did that mean for my professional space? And now we're going to transition from personal to professional. And thinking about my why and my what. So as I mentioned earlier, I loved animals, loved spending time outside. But the next step was figuring out, well, what does that look like for me as a career? Something that I, could do from a professional standpoint for the rest of my life. And what really started that journey was an internship program at Clearwater Nature Center in Southern Maryland. It was a similar nature center to the nature center at Watkins Park I showed earlier. And it just was such an incredible experience. And it really started with this focus on animal care, getting a chance to work with so many different species of wildlife, from snakes to spiders, rabbits, chinchillas, owls, hawks, and eagles, toads, turtles, lizards. And in doing so, again, I was building that really special bond with each and every one of them. Again, learning more about each and every species, strengthening that connection, and even overcoming fears. I can admit I was not the biggest fan of snakes and spiders before my time working at Clearwater Nature Center. But through that experience, not only overcame those fears, but also really grew to like those species, and not only like, but understand and ultimately respect, which I think is really critical. And then thinking about the specific focus on birds of prey, there's just something, magical about working with birds of prey. And I, while I still do it every now and again in my current role, or even in my free time, there's just, doing those types of bird of prey programs, there's just nothing like it. And oftentimes I can remember people in the audience saying, you must really love your job. And the only thing I could really muster at that time was a smile. There were no words to really describe that. And the other really strong component of this experience for me was environmental education. Feeling comfortable talking in the general public sense, giving presentations, giving talks, working with students. And I'll be honest, initially, the thought of working with kids, going into that role, absolutely terrified me. It was something very new. But something incredible happened. It just clicked, it worked. And I haven't looked back since. It also was about coming out of my shell, as I mentioned. I was really shy in middle school and even into high school a little bit. And this experience really helped me come out of that shell, giving public programs. And I was really coming into my own at this point. There were other powerful moments of looking at bird feeders through the Nature Center, learning more about all the different types of birds that were in this area. And I really appreciate a naturalist there at this Nature Center, Michael Patterson, for always providing that time and space for that learning. And I had a really powerful moment of reflection this year, especially earlier this year, the group Black AF and STEM hosted Black Birders Week. And it was during that week that Michael Patterson, a great mentor of mine, passed away. And he was someone who, this connection to birds, it really, there was a strong beginning with him. And so, really remembering those times where he invested the time in me to teach me to, so that I could learn and really pass down this knowledge to other people as well. And then other moments were really important too. Understanding that as I was facilitating these experiences, that I was being observant to the students I was working with. Understanding that they were having, within a similar experience, they were each having unique experiences. And I was starting to see these unique experiences through each of their eyes, which I think is a really powerful skill and a powerful gift of educators. That you can be in the same place doing the same program, but the impact of said program might be very different for every participating individual. And understanding and observing that dynamic is really incredible. And then bonding with birds. As I mentioned, I'm a bird nerd. I love my birds. And especially birds of prey. And having opportunities to do things like osprey banding in high school, hawk banding in Front Royal, Virginia. Again, these are moments that I'll never forget. And just admiring just, again, the things that these animals do naturally, like migration. The length and distance that these hawks and osprey are migrating. It's just incredible. And then also the importance of patience. I can remember doing the hawk banding that we would sit in a blind for hours sometimes. Sometimes we wouldn't see anything. And then all of a sudden the birds would come through the area. And so that aspect of patience when you're out in nature is really important, because sometimes you don't always see what you're looking for. But they're out there. But I think that also adds to the magic of nature. And I'm going to definitely hit on that later during the talk this evening. And then the other thing here is the power of facilitating these experiences. In my role now, one responsibility that I've had in the past is facilitating osprey banding experiences for the National Aquarium. And just the joy that brings for people, for our interns, for our summer student volunteers in the past, who just have these incredible moments with osprey. And just seeing the smiles on their faces, seeing the expressions, the joy, the happiness, I know instantly that those are moments those individuals will never forget, similar to my feelings through those moments as well. University of Maryland. So I decided to ultimately major in animal science pre-vet. At the time, that's really what I thought someone did. That was one of the only opportunities when loving animals and loving that time outside. And I started in that major and realized pretty soon, early on in that process, that it wasn't for me. I was struggling a lot. In terms of, I was getting all the help I could get in my classes from the teachers, professors, teaching assistants, other friends and colleagues, and it just wasn't sinking in. And one of my really great mentors, Dr. Mark Varner, who's pictured here, he sat me down and he said, Curtis, as you know, life is never easy, but it becomes that much easier when you're in the right place, doing the right thing. And it was almost instantly that University of Maryland had created a new program, their Wildlife Ecology and Management program. And I remember transferring into that program and instantly feeling home. getting a chance to work with wildlife biologist Dr. Lowell Adams, and his connection to urban wildlife ecology and urban wildlife management. He was also our class mentor for a diamondback terrapin project that I'll talk about in a little bit. And then Elizabeth Weiss, who really continued to encourage me to come out of my shell and really share my story. And I would give presentations to incoming students about my journey, my time at University of Maryland, and what that experience has meant to me. And again, these were moments where I was coming out of my shell, but really continuing to develop my purpose, my why, and then the different ways in which I was going to achieve that why. And then that diamondback terrapin program. It just was another species that I was able to connect with, doing field research along the Patuxent River for terrapin conservation, learning a lot from other researchers and my fellow students in that program. Again, a transformational experience. And one thing that's not pictured here, and I want to talk about some other lessons I've learned in the outdoors, nature's power of healing. There was a particular park, Lake Artemisia, that's really close to University of Maryland. And I started to notice, and my roommates did too, that anytime that I was stressed, they knew where Curtis was going. I knew where I was going. I was going somewhere outside, whether that was on campus or I was trying to find a place at Lake Artemisia to hike, to sit. Again, that connection back to water and wildlife that called that area home. Again, those things always take that stress away from me. And it comes very instantly too. And again, that's just one of nature's many powers and many gifts. But I wasn't done there. That time in nature continued. So I decided to pursue a master's degree at University of Delaware in wildlife ecology. As I mentioned, I'm very passionate about birds, but they didn't have a bird-related project for me, but they did have a project focusing on river otters in New Jersey. And I thought to myself, who's going to turn down river otters? Certainly not me. And so through this effort, I again learned a lot about the magic of fieldwork. And you can see in these pictures, even in the one that had snow in it, it was very, very cold, that it could be snowy, rainy, sleeting, it could be long field days, but there was just something so incredible about spending that time outside, even on the worst of days. And believe me, there are many memories of some of those longer field days. And even working with landowners, talking to them about the nature that's in their own backyard. I remember having conversations with many homeowners that had been in New Jersey for years, but might not have known that there were river otters so close by, or other wildlife species for them to connect to. And one other thing I wanted to share here is that during this experience, again, being patient in nature, I didn't see any otters, and I was doing this field work for about 2 full years. But I can tell you that story played huge dividends for me as an environmental educator. But also, the moment that I did finally see river otters about 2 years ago, I was like a kid in a candy store. I was wide-eyed, smiling. It had almost been like this species that had been eluding me for so long had finally unveiled itself. And this was in a lake. Notice again that connection to water and lakes. And Baltimore City in Baltimore County, Lake Roland. It was a truly incredible experience to finally see those otters. And to this day, many friends and colleagues still send me all the otter pictures, posts, videos. I was always known as the Otter Man in grad school. And that nickname has certainly stayed with me to this day. Connection through recreation. There's many ways that, we're able to connect to nature. Wildlife watching is one, recreation is another. And these are images from a summer program from Delaware Nature Society called Tough Mudder Nature, combining physical fitness and time in the outdoors. And what was really powerful for me here is just the idea of community and teamwork when in these outdoor spaces, and the bonding that occurred amongst the students. It was so inspiring, watching them continue to give their all to go through some of these challenges. And that image of me covered in mud also really resonates, and here's why. Believe it or not, that is exactly what I looked like when I had my first phone interview with the National Aquarium, with my boss hearing many a kid screaming in the background, Mr. Curtis, come crawl in the mud. And I can remember my boss saying, wishing, she said, it sounds like you're having a lot of fun there. It's like, I wish I could be there instead of in this office. And, again, in that moment, I would have never thought that I would, continue to be working at the National Aquarium, which again turned out to be a very transformational experience for me and just life-changing. Okay, so putting it all together, some nearby nature connections. One of these other programs that I wanted to talk about was working with an elementary school in Wilmington, Delaware. Again, connecting students, these first graders, to nearby nature, turtles, snakes, toads, talking about pollinators. And what always is so great when I look at these photos is just looking at people's eyes, the curiosity, the wonder, the awe, the excitement, the energy. It's infectious. And this is also a really powerful moment for me because it did help me confirm my why and my what. That for me, my why was twofold. One was continuing to invest in myself to strengthen and further develop the relationship with nature that was so important to me as a person, as an individual. But that was only step one. Step two was thinking about how can I do the best that I can do to co-create, co-develop, break down barriers to ensure that everyone has those opportunities to connect to nature in ways that are most relevant, relatable, meaningful, and impactful to them. We all have many different gateways to building that connection to nature. And it's through a lot of observation that we're able to determine what those are. And I wanted to share an example of that. So one of the programs that we did with these students was focused on pollinators. It was an 8-week immersive program. And the students grew a lot over those 8 weeks. I want to start by saying as well that we had to build trust, right? That's so important. And build that relationship with the students. And as that relationship grew, the connections to what they were experiencing and what they were learning grew with it. And for some of the pollinator work that we did, we had a pollinator Olympics, or an insect Olympics, I should say. And I was running a station focused on bees. And I just so happened to notice that many of the students, they were just always dancing. They were always just moving around, singing and dancing. And I said, what a great way to really start to talk about pollinators and bees and do it through dance as a really strong connection to the bee waggle dances that bees do to communicate to other bees where nectar, where flower sources are. And I can remember just huddling up with the kids, and we put together these dance routines. We put together these steps that they had to remember and somehow communicate that to someone else, and then so on and so forth. And it was just a really powerful moment for me because it showed my growth as an educator of connecting and observing what was happening around me and using that gateway of interest that these students had as a way to help bridge that gap or make a stronger connection to nature, in this case, to pollinators and to bees. And somewhere out there, I'm sure, there are videos of me doing these bee dances that, as far as I'm concerned, they can stay buried wherever they are. But it was a really, really great time with those students. And I like to say, as an educator, it's, I've lost all sense of that shame, in the sense that, we do singing, we dance, we do puppet shows, all for the sake of making that connection with our audiences. And that's so incredibly powerful. And just wanted to also share some stories of impact from some of these students. And these were images that students drew from, I believe, from a middle school or an elementary school in Delaware after a program, an insect-based program. So one of the things you see in that first image is, when I grow up, I want to find insects, right? So that desire to learn more, that desire, and thinking about what those next steps for them are, that connection, that interest that they have. We've talked about earlier about overcoming fears. So you help me not hate insects, right? I think that that's powerful in changing things. And, also sharing information and learning. And again, these were the perspectives of the students that were in the audiences for these variety of programs. Going back to personal, time in nature means so much to me as a professional. It means even more for me as a person. I've mentioned earlier that it's wonder, it's awe, curiosity, learning, calmness, stress relief. Spending time in nature is really part of my self-care routine. I always tell people that I am like the person that's really grumpy if they haven't had a lot of sleep, or maybe the person that's a little hangry if I haven't had that time outdoors. It's just so central to my mental health and well-being. And it's important that I always prioritize that as best as I can, whether that's hiking, kayaking, spending more time with birds of prey and learning from many, many different mentors. I really do sometimes enjoy my alone time in the outdoors to reflect, to think through different things I might be going through. But I also enjoy that time with family and friends. One of those top images is of my brother and I on a family fishing trip. Every summer we go twice a year. And it's just so incredible to just reconnect with family and bond in these outdoor spaces. And again, connection to water. Being outside with friends during all seasons too. And then it's just really absorbing that vastness and beauty of nature. The two images I have here, the top one is of Hawk Mountain in Pennsylvania. And I just remember sitting here looking at that image, as I saw it live, and, just so many reflective thoughts go through your mind. And then that last image there is of the Patuxent River. It was actually I remember it was from a friend's wedding shower a few years ago. And I can remember when we all saw that image, we all just paused. We saw the sky and we were all speechless. And we were stood in silence, about 30 people standing in silence, just watching the sky with no real words to describe what we were seeing and the beauty that we were seeing. And now we're back to nature in my neighborhood. About 3 years ago, I moved to Glen Burnie from PG County, Maryland. And the images that you see here are animals that I've seen on my deck, my porch. I've heard. And like most things, I just stop and I just instantly go over to take a look. Whether it's praying mantids, walking sticks, tree frogs. This community has a very robust tree frog population. Especially earlier this year, they were calling a lot. And it was actually part of nature's alarm clock, where it was the tree frogs calling, as well as one of the eastern towhees in the backyard saying, you could hear the towhee's patented "drink your tea" call. And it just was an amazing way of starting the day. And what's also so fascinating about this was the nature that I was observing around this community around this house actually helped the realtor sell the house to me. I can remember the first day that we visited the house about 3 years ago, and I could hear the spring peepers, these little frogs calling. And it just brought me back to this really just state of calmness, this state of, excitement that this was where I wanted to be. And I remember telling the realtor, exclaiming, like, the spring peepers are calling, the frogs are calling. And I believe he looked at me like I had like 8 heads, just like, what are you saying? What are you doing? And then I realized and I told him, I said, don't worry, it's helping you sell the house. And now bringing it all together. That question in the beginning was, again, how do we get from that little boy that's sitting on the deck, that has that passion for nature, that love for wildlife, to someone in both of my personal and professional lives? It's created this passion. It's created this career for me. And, I just want to circle back to the things that we've talked about this evening. The importance of nearby nature, the importance of the bonds and the relationships that are made with the nature nearby, and the importance of those powerful experiences that we may have, whether that's, whether it is nearby nature or nature that we travel to observe and connect with. It's the importance of understanding our gateways, the ways in which that we inherently connect to these opportunities and to these experiences. Are we observing? Are we witnessing? Are we understanding how people are all connecting to these spaces around us? Which, again, is so critical as an educator. It's about the reflection, about the time spent, whether that's writing, drawing, talking about our shared experiences, and connecting in really powerful and critical ways. It's also about that time and investment, the regularity of when these experiences are happening. And moving forward, as I mentioned earlier, it's about constantly doing our part each and every day to intentionally break down, to understand and break down barriers to access, barriers to these programmatic opportunities. And when I think about where I am now in my personal and professional life, I wouldn't be where I am without all of these many, many experiences and many teachings that I've learned along the way. I was incredibly proud of myself back in 2018 when I was recognized by the Maryland Association of Environmental and Outdoor Education as their Educator of the Year for the state of Maryland. It was incredibly humbling, and it really showed a lot about where my growth had been, both as a person and my connection to the outdoors, but also as one who is seeking to foster and help to co-create and co-develop those opportunities for others as well. And with that, I want to say that I view my path as a story with many different chapters. And it's a story that hasn't been fully written yet. And I'm excited for more connections to nature. And I will continue to keep my ears open and eyes open, so that I can go where nature takes me. And I know if I do that, I'll be exactly where I need to be. And with that, I just want to say thank you to Audubon Naturalist Society. Thank you so much to Sarah Nella for the opportunity to chat with everyone this evening. And with that, I will open the floor up for any questions or any thoughts.
Thank you so much, Curtis. I really enjoyed this trajectory through your life and how nature played such an important role in it. So I know that there were um, many opportunities to work directly with nature. How do you see that role, and how do you see that changing now? How does that impacted the way that you're trying to connect others with nature as well?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I think what it first is really that space of understanding, of really trying to become aware of how people are wanting to connect to nature, and really thinking about that as your gateway. So being observant, understanding from maybe what people are sharing, what people might be drawing, what people might be reflecting on, um, to help co-create and co-develop those programs, or co-create experiences within a program that is very unique for different individuals. And I also think what's really important is it's really about the importance of building the connection with the individual, because I think when we build relationships and we build community, it allows spaces, it allows opportunities for information to connect and really set in different ways. And so I try to invest a lot of time when I think about programs that I'm involved in, work that I do, about intentionally building relationships, whether that's with students, with families. It helps to build that trust. But then it also just creates really good opportunities for dialogue, in terms of, shared learning and shared experiences.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat. Anna is a self-proclaimed big nerd, and that will love to learn about doing banding. What programs do you recommend for her to research?
Yeah. Number one, I'll also leave my email in the chat, and would love to follow up with anyone who has questions. And I can also share different opportunities that I'm aware of, for those who are interested. And so I actually first became connected to a lot of the bird banding through my work at Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. And it actually wasn't even my primary role. I just saw it and was really curious about it. And I started to ask my supervisors. It was like, I've seen this really cool thing. How do I get to be a part of that? What do I have to do? And so they helped create space in my schedule to opportunities to spend some time on the Patuxent River, working with Greg Kearns, who is just incredible and outstanding. I swear there's nothing he doesn't know about wildlife. And he has also connected so many people to osprey banding opportunities. It's so many individuals. And so that was kind of how I became connected in the first place. And then as I started to connect with other people in the field, and people started to understand where my interests were, I started to find out about more opportunities to ban birds. So whether that was hawk banding with Greg Kearns, or whether that was saw-whet owl banding with Melissa Boyle in state parks, whether that was barn owl banding with a good colleague of mine who works for Audubon. And as I was getting more acclimated to my field, these opportunities I kept seeing them, and I was like, how do I take advantage of these and really connect? Because yeah, I really enjoy bird banding, and just spending that time out with especially wild birds of prey. They're just unspeakable in terms of just what connections I feel when I'm in that space.
Thank you so much. Um, through that crystal ball of yours, what your next chapter look like for connecting with nature?
That's a really great question. And so I like to think that my why has stayed constant from the start, right? Once I figured out what that was about building my own connection to nature and also continuing to co create and explore opportunities for co development for others. But my what, as you've seen this evening, has changed over time, from working as an educator to someone in community engagement. Now, even someone focused and even more intentionally on organizational change and diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice and environmental justice. So when I think about my next steps, number one is I think the sky is the limit. And I attribute so much of that to my family that have always just believed in me. They have always supported me and continue to push me to strive for my best. So, but for myself, I really do see myself in executive leadership roles in organizations moving forward. It's something that I've really started to focus on a lot this year, and working with a lot of mentors to help support that. And in doing so, able to work with incredible people, incredible staff, and other organizations to really think about how we do this collaboratively, continue to do this collaboratively, about breaking down those barriers, and dismantling them from an equity and inclusion perspective, so that again, everyone can have these opportunities to connect to nature in ways that are most impactful to them. And from a personal standpoint, I think it's just always reminding myself about self-care. And as many people that know me know, I've come a long way in that space, around balance and solidifying that for myself and making sure that I do make sure that I'm spending that time outside as often as I need it, so that I can stay in harmony with myself. So what I would really love for myself is to, continue to visit as many of those public lands as possible. This year, I was able to get a hold of a park pass, an annual park pass. And I just look forward to continuing to explore the wildlife refuges, the national parks, and continue to cross those off my list over the next few years.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I have two questions. I'm hijacking the question, people. I'm sorry, but please feel free to write your questions below as well. Um, I wanted to know, first of all, what are some of the honey holes that you have in Baltimore? Like, what are places that you love in this area to visit and why?
Sure. So when I think about Baltimore, the first one is Masonville Cove. It's a wildlife refuge in South Baltimore. It's a place that I spend a lot of my work time at, and a project that I work on a lot at the aquarium. And it's actually why I took the job at the aquarium in the first place, because of the aquarium's work at Masonville Cove. It definitely connected to my interest in wildlife ecology, habitat restoration, environmental education. Was also really focused on community engagement, and also an intentional integration of principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice to that work, especially considering that the communities surrounding Masonville Cove would be considered environmental justice communities. And so that's one spot that I love visiting. There's a lot of incredible wildlife there, including a nesting pair of bald eagles. There are osprey in the summer. Other parts of Baltimore that I really enjoy, I think that Patterson Park in Baltimore City is a great one. It's just a huge green space and just incredible bird diversity there. It's one of the top birding locations in Baltimore. And then just outside of Baltimore, well, before I say that, another one that's really been great for me is Glens Falls Leakin Park. It's actually one of the largest green spaces in Baltimore City. And then just outside of the Baltimore area, the first place that comes to mind is Patuxent Research Refuge. Patuxent Research Refuge, I remember going there as a kid for programs. It was about maybe 30 minutes from where I lived. And again, it's one of those full circle moments because as a counselor for camps, I remember taking my students there for programs. And then we work with Patuxent Research Refuge staff all the time now in partnership with the Aquarium. So it's a space that I really enjoy going and visiting and just taking some walks around the site. I've seen a lot of otter sign there, but haven't had that magical moment yet of seeing otters there yet. But I know that time will only come. And it's just, it's close to College Park as well. So it brings back a lot of memories spent at University of Maryland too.
Wonderful. And the last question, there's a question from Anna. Do you ever lead bird walks?
Yeah, I do from time to time, and I enjoy doing them, or just general nature walks. And what's really great too is, especially as an educator, what really inspired me was continue to help people complete that picture for themselves. That this animal isn't just a bird; it's this type of bird, and it does this, or it isn't just a duck; it's this type of duck, and it does that. And, also working with groups together, in the form of community science that, I might lead a walk or a hike and someone may ask a question like, well, do you know what that is? And I might not, and say, well, you know what, we can look at that together and we can figure it out. And I think those are really powerful moments too, where you're creating that space for inquiry, for learning, for shared learning together. I would say too that every time I lead walks and do programs, I'm always learning and growing. And continuing to, especially when it comes to like recognizing bird calls or animal sign, again, one of the teachings in nature is learning, right? That you're constantly doing that and you're constantly growing in that space. And I did see another question pop in the chat about City Nature Challenge and iNaturalist. So I do use iNaturalist, probably not as much as I should. And just for context, iNaturalist is a free app for your phones. It is to capture wildlife information, wildlife data. So you can take pictures of wildlife species and actually upload that on your phone, and it helps. All that data gets compiled so that you have a better understanding of the biodiversity in your area. And it also does include plants and fungi as well. And for City Nature Challenge, the Aquarium has participated for the last 3 years. This year was the third, leading our Baltimore efforts with several different partners. And I highly recommend iNaturalist. It's a great app. It's a great program in general, and definitely recommend engaging in City Nature Challenge as well. City Nature Challenge is that friendly international competition to see what cities across the world can identify the most species in a small amount of time, and also engage the most people.
Awesome. So sorry about that. I wanted to give people a chance to see it in case they are not familiar. Although I know that many of our frequent flyers have heard many things about iNaturalist. Um, I don't want to intrude, but I think that if we have some of the people that you mentioned in the talk today, if they wanted to turn their videos on and say hello, totally their choice. But I think it would be fun for people to see the tree that birthed such a beautiful human being.
Yeah, and I can't say thank you enough to, family and friends. And, this is a collective journey. It's a collective process. And it's important that we always continue to do that together. I remember my dad and my mom always saying it takes a village. And that, I think about my life and the different people who have, again, invested that time in me, who saw something in me, and prioritize spending that time to take me under their wing and really show me the right pathways, the right opportunities, answer my questions. And I know I wouldn't be here today without those family, those friends, those mentors, those colleagues. That it really is critical to have that support.
All right. Oh, there they are. Awesome. Curtis, would you like to introduce us?
Sure. So my parents, Curtis and Terry Bennett, who were so instrumental in just creating some of those opportunities and really inspiring that sense of connectivity to nature and a resiliency in me as an individual. So just really want to just share how much I love them and just appreciate just everything that they've done to create those opportunities, for me.
It's really nice, Curtis. Of course, we love you as well. But it really is nice and to see you share your story from a young age, to connect the dots, turning your passion into your career. Who would have known? Wow, I'm speechless as well. We didn't know that all those experiences molded you into the person, that you are today. All those experiences. We think that definitely experiences are just as vital and as important as classroom learning. So it really has made a difference in your life. And I'm glad to see that you appreciate it now as an adult looking back. Mm-hmm. From the same young man who did not want to write the journal. We had to get, he did not want to do that West Coast journal, but it was a requirement.
On the spot. Awesome.
And I really appreciate that. I mean, it's also like the record keeping there. Like I was, just to even have those memories, saving that stuff. I think that's just so powerful to really reflect back on. And it's one of those things like when you have moments, when we think about impact, and we're talking about this a lot within the aquarium, impact is relative. You never really know what, how a moment will settle in with someone. It might be, you might see it immediately. You might see it a couple of weeks from that point. You might see it a few months. You might see it a couple of years. And it's different for different people. And, I look at my life and I also think about like the students I've worked with in the past or community members, and you see the same thing show up where it's like when that impactful moment sinks in, it's really incredible to see. and to be a part of that process. But it doesn't always happen right away. But that's the power of impact. And I think as an educator and as someone that's working in community engagement, I think we have to acknowledge that, and we have to, be aware of that.
Absolutely. We have one last question from our audience before we say goodbye for the night. Christine would like to know, she met a young man who had learned an enormous number of birds very early. How could one keep the interest going?
Yeah, I think with birding, it's always important to continue to get out in the field, and I try to go on bird walks when I can to learn from other birders, especially ones that are much better at sound ID than I am. So I'm always incredibly amazed at just when people pick up on those minute sounds. I'm like, how did you hear that? Or how did you, know what that was? And, I think that really helps. So attending different programs, bird walks, nature walks, attending talks from people that that this individual may admire or want to learn more about on the work that they do. So I think those are really good opportunities. Also, coursework. I took an ornithology class in grad school, and it was really hard because you had to memorize about 90 different bird calls. But a lot of that stuff just stayed with me. I was thinking about laughing and joking about it, that I can remember going to the gym, and here I am with my iPod listening to bird calls while I'm at the gym trying to study for these different exams, where I'm sure everyone else is listening to regular music. But yeah, I think just that time, that investment to learn, to grow. And the other thing I would say, and I'm happy to send some specific opportunities that I see and to share that. So please feel free to email me, is some of those bird banding experiences. I mean, those are so transformational. When you see people's face of holding an osprey, holding a hawk, holding an owl, just their eyes light up. And those are moments that individuals will never forget.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for such a wonderful night. I truly enjoyed your story, and I truly enjoyed the contribution of your parents. Thanks again for raising such a fine young man. To our audience, I hope you enjoyed the program. Thank you again for your support, and have a good night.